In the 10 or so years that Commodore made the Amiga, there were several different models of the machine, ranging from the original granddaddy of the Amiga range, the A1000, to the hugely popular Amiga 500 and 1200 machines. We had big desktop hoggers like the mighty Amiga 2000 and 1500, the plain but very powerful Amiga 4000 that I used to drool over as a kid, and there were machines that divided opinion like the Amiga 600 and the console CD32, as well as oddities like the living room multimedia Amiga-based device, the CD-TV, to name a few. But there is one model of the Amiga I've always seen referred to as the best Amiga model ever made, and that is the Amiga 3000. And this video is one of the most requested on my channel ever since I gave a little teaser of this machine back in 2017. But even though I haven't shown it much on camera since, the A3000 has been in regular use, and actually I've made a few improvements and additions to this machine over the last few years. But what's so special about the A3000? Well, to answer that, we need to take a trip back to the year 1990. The summer when movies like Edward Scissorhands, Arachnophobia and Gremlins 2 were in the cinemas, and MC Hammer was riding high in the charts, and shell suits were actually fashionable, can you believe it? Before the Amiga 3000, all of the previous models of the Amiga had been based on the original chipset and the Motorola 68K processor, just in different cases with different expansion slots really. To be honest, there's not really a massive amount of difference between the Amiga 500 and the Amiga 2000, apart from the addition of a few slots in there and a massive ugly case, and the fact that it cost around 3 times the price. But the Amiga 3000, released in June of 1990, saw the biggest changes in the Amiga architecture to date. The entire system was reimagined as a high-end workstation, with the 7 MHz 68K processor of previous Amigas being replaced with the Motorola 68030 CPU running at a blazing fast 16 or 25 MHz. The machine also had 32-bit system memory, onboard SCSI, a scan doubler and flicker fixer which allowed the system to output onto a standard PC monitor, and the machine was contained in a beautiful pizza box design that resembled high-end machines from companies like Next at the time, and many people consider the A3000 to be the most attractive model of the Amiga range. With its professionally printed Commodore Amiga 3000 logo in the corner of the case, LEDs for power and hard disk activity, a 3.5-inch 880K floppy disk drive embedded into the front of the case. I do believe some machines actually came with a high-density floppy drive that could hold more, but mine is only a double-density drive. And a removable cover, covering a space for a second internal drive. A power button on the top right of the front of the machine, and some very sleek lines. The A3000 had a really nice, clean and professional look, and looks so much better and smaller than the bulky Amiga 2000. The A3000 replaced the standard Amiga mouse, nicknamed by many fans as the Tank Mouse due to its bulky appearance, with a design that was nicknamed the Pregnant Mouse due to its bloated belly. Now, unfortunately, I don't have one of the original Amiga 3000 mice, but this third-party ST and Amiga mouse works just fine with my machine. And being a big box Amiga, the A3000 comes with a separate keyboard. Now, the keys on the big box Amigas actually feel a bit different to the Amiga 500 keys, as the keys have a bit more of a matte kind of feel to them. There is a slightly rough texture to the keys, and even though underneath they use the same rubber domes as the lower end Amigas, they do feel a little bit more springy than the Amiga 500 and the 1200. Now, these are not premium keyboards by any stretch of the imagination, but they are reasonable to type on, and in fact I was quite comfortable writing the script for this video using it on the Amiga 3000. And not only did the look of the machine kind of resemble something like a Next station, but apparently the Next Step OS was an inspiration for the visual style of the new version of the Amiga's operating system that first shipped with the Amiga 3000, Workbench 2.0. Although, not all Amiga 3000s actually shipped with 2.0 out of the box. Now, to really simplify things, the Amiga's operating system comes in 2 parts. You have the Kickstart, which is usually contained on a ROM chip on most machines, and the Workbench is the disk-booted GUI section of the operating system. And the previous version of the Amiga's OS was version 1.3, and this shipped with machines like the Amiga 500, the 2000 and the CD-TV. And in 1989, there was talk of the next version of the Amiga's OS, logically named version 1.4. Although version 1.4 was never actually released to the public, instead it was developed into 2.0, some early Amiga 3000s actually shipped with the beta of version 1.4 on a ROM. Now, these early Amiga 3000s had a ROM tower inside these machines with the 1.4 beta chips on there, and they were programmed to boot the final version of 2.0 or the earlier 1.3 release when the machine was turned on from disk. It would soft-load these ROMs from either a hard disk or a floppy. But it was actually possible to exit out of this boot select screen by moving your mouse to the top left corner and then clicking a secret close gadget. And then you could actually boot into the secret 1.4 beta ROM. And when you do, you see some very strange things. Now, there were actually discs of Workbench 1.4 that were released just to developers at conferences in 1989, and there are a few images of some of these versions floating around the internet. And if I boot one up here, you can see that if you're familiar with the Amiga's operating system, running Kickstart and Workbench 1.4 together is kind of a weird halfway house between 1.3 and 2.0. And although Kickstart 1.4 was only ever recommended to be used as a bootstrap to load a different version of the operating system from disk, it is interesting to see what could have been if Commodore had released Workbench 1.4. Now, Kickstart and Workbench 2.0 were a real revolution for the Amiga, and although back then many games players hated it as it did break compatibility with a lot of older and poorly programmed games, it really did bring the Amiga's operating system into the 90s and made it feel like a professional OS. And a lot of the concepts that were introduced in version 2.0 remain in the Amiga's operating system to this day. And I know it looks primitive today, but Workbench 2.0's grey colour theme and the pseudo 3D icons really made the entire operating system look a lot more professional than the previous versions. Plus enhancements like being able to view hidden files from the Workbench, having a more fully featured command line in here as well, loads of reliability fixes, it was much more stable. 2.0 was a must-have upgrade for serious Amiga users, and even today, if I go back to a 1.3 machine, I will admit I do feel really limited. So next, we'll get the Amiga 3000 opened up, I'll show you a few of the expansions and fixes that I've done to this machine, and then we'll get it booted up and have a little look at what we can do with the Amiga 3000 in 2021. And just before we jump into that, I wanted to take a quick moment to give a big thank you to this video sponsor, my wonderful friends at Skillshare. Now, they are a massive online learning community where millions of people from all around the world take their next step in their own creative journey. And you can take part in thousands of classes on so many different topics, including marketing, design, photography, video, life improvement, and lots more, all in easy to digest parts. And if you've ever wanted to start your own YouTube channel, you can learn tips from the best. Marcus Brownlee has recently started an incredible series all about YouTube success that I've learned some great tips from. And Skillshare is also incredibly affordable, especially right now when a lot of us are still working from home. It's a great way to learn with your extra time and a lot cheaper and safer than pricey in-person workshops. So why don't you get started today and of course help out the channel by claiming this incredible offer. The first 1,000 people to use the link in this video's description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So claim it quick, help out the channel, and a big thank you to my friends at Skillshare. Okay, so I thought I'd give you a quick tour of the I/O ports on the A3000, and obviously you've seen the front of it already. I did actually retro bright my A3000 last summer, but it has gone a little bit yellow again, but you know, it's not too bad. So if we look around to the right of the machine, first we've got the keyboard connector there, which connects the included A3000 or an Amiga 2000 keyboard, which mine technically is, although apart from the slightly different case badge, they are pretty much the same keyboard. Next to that, we have two standard 9-pin Atari-style joystick ports, one for connecting the mouse and one to plug a joystick in. So yes, you can get a bit of Chaos Engine or Zool time on the A3000 between working on your high-end multimedia projects or your 3D renders. And around back is where the main business happens on this machine. Now, we've got the internal power supply there with a nice big cooling fan, which actually isn't too noisy on my machine. I've read reviews from the time that said the A3000's fan was actually really loud, and I'm not sure if the previous owner replaced it with a quieter fan, but really on my machine, it's not offensive at all. And you've got a lot of the usual Amiga ports on there. We've got serial, an external floppy disk drive connector, a parallel port, and above that you will see there is an external SCSI port. Now this means that you can attach things like tape streamers, CD-ROM drives, or external hard disks to the machine. And then the two ports next to the parallel connector are something very unique to the A3000. Now we have a standard 15 kilohertz connector, which is the same RGB video output that you found on most of the models of the Amiga, where you connect it up to a standard PAL or NTSC monitor like the Commodore 1084 or this Philips CM88332 monitor that I've got in here. And most classic Amiga games and applications ran on these resolutions, and they would output via this connector. But next to it on the A3000, you will see a VGA style port with 31 kilohertz written above it. Now this is where you can connect a standard PC monitor to the machine, and then flicking the switch next to it to enable, that would then scan double the Amiga's native 15 kilohertz PAL or NTSC output up to the frequency that could be displayed by any standard PC monitor. So this means two things really. Firstly, the standard Amiga modes, which are great for gaming, weren't all that good for things that needed higher resolutions like word processing or desktop publishing. And with the introduction of the enhanced chipset in the A3000, the Amiga could now output high resolution screen modes that suited these tasks a bit better. And they couldn't actually display everything on an RGB monitor. So what you do is you connect the SVGA PC monitor to here, flip that switch, and really it means everything is going to be outputted through the same port. And the A3000 was the only Amiga that had this built in, and it is very useful, although it becomes even more useful when you twin that with a graphics card. So in my machine, I've got a Picasso 2 24-bit graphics card, and it's got an input here. And on other Amigas, apart from the A3000, you'd need to connect an external scan doubler here, or have two monitors, one for the Picasso output and one for standard Amiga modes like games. But with the A3000, I can just run a VGA cable from the Amiga's 31 kilohertz output into the Picasso 2 input, and then all the Amiga modes pretty much will be displayed through the Picasso's output. That includes games, the operating system, high resolution productivity software, everything. So it is a really neat, hassle-free solution. And finally, on the back of the machine, we've got these standard Amiga Phono RCA audio output connectors that you can connect up to any hi-fi or mixer. And opening the A3000 is actually really simple. After you've removed the 6 case screws, you just pull the front of the case forward to reveal the machine's innards. Now, on my last video, I mentioned that my A3000 had a cracked LED board, this small custom board that houses both of the front case LEDs. Now, a load of people got in touch offering newer solutions, but I actually managed to get this original part from Simon Marsden, who's a lovely guy who works at the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester, and he actually maintains their A3000-based VR machines. And he had a few spares, and also I didn't have a floppy drive eject button. Again, a lot of people got in touch after my last video offering 3D printed replacements, but Simon actually managed to find me an original replacement part in his big stash of parts that he's got in his garage. So a massive thank you to Simon, and it really does complete the look of the machine having these original parts in here. And actually, I haven't made heaps of upgrades in here. I kind of wanted this machine to be mostly close to the old school experience that you would have had back in the day, but there are a few modern niceties in here as well. For example, I've got a SCSI to SD card adapter inside, which allows me to use a modern SD card as a SCSI hard disk replacement. And this device is a bit pricey. I think I paid around £100 for it a few years ago, but it has worked fantastically ever since. And you can see that the A3000 is quite generous with the amount of slots that you get inside the machine. Now, most of them are Zorro 3 slots, which is the fastest version of the classic Amiga slots, and it's kind of the equivalent of an ISA slot in a PC. And you can attach a few additional internal expansions here. There are actually 3 different types of expansion slots in the A3000. We have the Amiga video slot at the bottom, where my graphics card is connected. We've got 4 Zorro slots in here, and 2 ISA slots for PC compatibility. Now you might be thinking, why ISA slots? Well, actually it's because you can use a card called a bridge board, and I've got one here. This is a 286 bridge board. So what it really is an 8 megahertz 286 PC on a card. Now unfortunately, my machine won't boot when I've got this card plugged in, so I need to do some more troubleshooting on it. It could be something to do with that old battery on there, or maybe the caps need replacing, but you know, it will be very cool if I can get that working and really have a 286 PC nicely contained within the A3000's case as well. And the Amiga 3000 actually uses a short-lived standard for its RAM expansion. It uses static column zip RAM, which is a bit fiddly to fit and actually quite hard to get hold of today. I've got 2 megabytes on board in this machine, but also a lot easier. In that Zorro slot there, I've got a 256 megabyte memory expansion. This is a modern device, bought this a couple of years ago, called the Big RAM Plus. So that gives me loads of RAM, you know, for a classic Amiga. And at the bottom we have the comically large graphics card, a Picasso 2, which gives me those lovely high-resolution 24-bit graphics modes. It actually uses a Cirrus Logic chip. Remember them? And I've got this machine online using a parallel port device called a Plip box. Now this just plugs into the Amiga's parallel port, and then you connect power and Ethernet to it, and you can get the machine connected to the internet and my local area network. Admittedly, not very quickly, but it does work. So before we wrap up this increasingly long video, I thought I'd show you just a few of the applications that I run on my Amiga 3000. I'm actually running Amiga OS version 3.1 from 1994 on here, which was Commodore's final version of Amiga OS. And I know there are newer versions available. Version 3.2 just came out last month, in fact. But I've got this running on here, very stable, and I'm quite hesitant to, you know, fix what isn't broke. And I don't want all of my Amigas being the same. The idea is that my Amiga 3000 is going to be a different experience to my Amiga 4000, my 1200, my vampired Amiga 600, my CD32. This machine is meant to be more in line with that kind of mid-90s era feeling. So I've got it connected up to a HP 17-inch CRT monitor, an SVGA PC monitor, and I'm displaying Workbench at 800 by 600 resolution via the Picasso 2. And as you can see, that gives me a nice amount of screen real estate, and everything looks nice and sharp, and I'm running this in a 24-bit color mode. And I'm also running Magic Workbench on here, which was an icon replacement package that came out around 1994. Again, just to give this machine a different feeling to my other Amigas, which mainly all use the Glow Icons package. And this is Amiga Vision. Now, this was a Commodore product that was bundled with many Amiga 3000s, and this is what they called an authoring package. Now, this was designed to make presentations, really, so you could think of it as an early version of something like PowerPoint. Now, the more common Amiga program that most people use for this is Scala, which got developed for many more years after Amiga Vision and is much more fully featured. And Amiga Vision is actually pretty complicated to use if you're not familiar with it, but it could be used to do some pretty powerful things, you know, for 1990, including things like point-of-sale systems to run demos or kiosks at places like museums. And the Amiga really was the perfect platform for this kind of thing. And it was nice to see Commodore themselves actually making an effort to push that side of the Amiga. And as I mentioned before, I've got my A3000 online, so I can run a web browser here and view, admittedly, very basic and limited websites on here. It's got no CSS support, and of course it is very slow, but having network connectivity is useful for downloading things directly to the machine. For example, I can connect to Aminet and download new Amiga programs that people are still making today. I can access FTP servers full of Amiga programs and files. I can even download software using the very handy Amiga Explorer from Cloanto, and that means I can transfer files directly to and from the A3000 across my network using my PC. And there are also classic Amiga word processors like Final Writer and Wordworth that run on here. Now, these can be run on lower end Amigas, but having the Picasso 2 card and running it at higher screen resolutions makes them so much more comfortable to work on. And really using something like Wordworth 7 is almost on par with running something like Office 95. Admittedly, not quite as fully featured, but for the kind of things most users did, it did the job great. And there are lots more great productivity programs for the Amiga, like Brilliance, which is a powerful bitmap graphics editor that even works with 24-bit graphics, and you could get some stunning results with it for the time. And actually, it's still around today as an open source program called Graphics 2. And there was briefly a Unix version of the Amiga 3000 released by Commodore called the A3000UX that had a full port of AT&T's Unix System 5 installed on it that dual booted along with Amiga OS. And legend has it that Sun Microsystems wanted to license the Amiga 3000UX hardware as a lower cost alternative to their high-end Sun workstations. But Commodore management didn't see the value in this and declined their offer, and then ended the Unix project shortly after. And I know that lots of people always comment in my videos when I do Amiga stuff going, show us the sysinfo scores, so I'll quickly run that on here as well so you can see. But of course, this is an 030 based Amiga, and you can install WHD load on here and run all of those classic Amiga disk-based games and demos, some of which actually struggled with the Amiga 3000 specs back in the day, but today, using WHD load, pretty much everything works fine on here. Now, I could sit here for the next hour showing programs, but this video is not meant to be a demo of Amiga productivity applications. It's more about the Amiga 3000 itself. And 31 years after the machine was released, admittedly, there's not much you can do on here that you couldn't do using an Amiga 1200 with one of the more modern 030 accelerators, or even using something like WinUAE, the emulator on your PC or Mac. But as a time capsule and an example of Commodore engineering at its finest, I am really pleased to have the Amiga 3000 in my collection. And if you enjoyed this video, just a quick reminder that I do a weekly retro gaming and technology podcast. New episodes released every Friday. Search for the Retro Hour podcast in your favorite podcast client, or you can get it from our website at theretrohour.com, or just ask your smart speaker. And while you're here on YouTube, here are another couple of videos I think you might enjoy. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.